Good morning to everyone, and welcome to the Legal Illuminations Program organized by the Legislation and Legal Opinion Commission in its version dedicated to the 2022 elections. This is Ebrahim AlBusmait, an Assistant Counselor in the Legislation and Legal Opinion Commission, and today we are going to have a short presentation about transparency principles in the electoral process. The election is not a recent process in the history of the Kingdom of Bahrain, as from the spirit of early popular participation, Bahrain held its first municipal elections in 1924. The municipal council at that time consisted of 24 members, in which half of them were appointed and the other half were elected by the people. And in its effort to build the basic rules of the state by involving citizens in decision-making, Bahrain chose the most democratic way to prepare its first constitution, which was through the establishment of a constituent council that consisted of 22 elected members by a public secret direct election, a number of no more than 10 members appointed by a decree, and the ministers by virtue of their positions. And on the 1st of December, 1972, citizens flocked to the ballot boxes to elect 22 members out of 58 candidates for membership of the Constituent Council. However, the historic turning point in the beginning of a new era in Bahrain's political history was at the launch of His Majesty the King to his reform project by introducing broad reforms in various sectors, in which most important was promoting popular participation in decision-making. And that popular participation in decision-making began with a referendum on the National Action Charter draft, which received an approval rate of 98.4% in 2001. And then it continued in the first parliamentary and municipal elections that were held after the reform project in 2002, and continued since then on legally specified dates without delay or disruption. The transparency of the elections, which is the core topic of our lecture today, and in it we are going to see how the elections in the Kingdom of Bahrain enjoy a high degree of transparency. And this topic will be divided into 4 key principles. The first will be the judicial supervision over the electoral process. The second will cover the transparency of the procedures carried out in the electoral process. The third will be the civil monitoring of the elections. And the fourth will be presenting some additional measures to ensure transparency. The electoral process in the Kingdom of Bahrain enjoys complete independence from the executive authority, starting with the independence of the organizing body, all the way to the full supervision by the judicial authority. And when we refer to the organizing body here, we are talking about the Legislation Legal Opinion Commission, because in 2007, the Elections and Referendum Department was appended to the Commission to ensure that the organization of the electoral process is organized by a fully independent body of a judicial nature that takes into account the principles of impartiality, neutrality, and legal grounds. The Elections and Referendum Department is mainly tasked with organizing and preparing all the necessary logistical, substantive, and technical preparations for every official election or referendum in the Kingdom of Bahrain. And before we move on, let's take a look at the composition of the Legislation and Legal Opinion Commission that ensures its independence, since it is, as we previously mentioned, considered the organizing body of the electoral process after the Elections and Referendum Department was appended to it. The Legislation and Legal Opinion Commission finds its legal basis in the Constitution, as the Constitution provided for under the title of the Judicial Authority, as we can see in the article displayed on the slide. There are fundamental grounds that ensure the independence of the Legislation and Legal Opinion Commission. The law stipulated that it's an independent commission of a judicial nature. It enjoys a legal personality and an independent budget. It exercises its technical powers independently without any intervention. Its members are appointed by royal orders, which ensure their independence from any other authority. Members of the commission, while carrying out their technical duties, shall only be subject to the supervision of their superiors within the commission, according to their ranks. Its chairman represented before the judiciary and in dealing with others, and the chairman shall have the powers granted to the minister by laws and regulations regarding the administrative and financial affairs of the commission. All these grounds we've mentioned ensure that the Legislation Legal Opinion Commission, which is the organizing body of the electoral process, work in full independence from the executive authority. In order to strengthen democracy and surround the process of electing members of the Council of Representatives with more guarantees that ensure its soundness, the Legislative Decree number 14 of 2002 with respect to the exercise of political rights stipulated that the Minister of Justice shall chair a Supreme Committee for overall supervision of the election soundness of the Council of Representatives members throughout the whole kingdom. This Supreme Committee shall include in its membership a sufficient number of judges and councillors who shall be named by a decision issued by the Minister of Justice. The law did not only emphasize the overall supervision by the judicial authority over the elections, but also stipulated that a supervisory committee should be formed in each electoral district. And those committees shall consist of a chairman from the judicial or legal system in the kingdom, along with 2 members, which also ensures that the supervision of the electoral process by the judicial authority. Such committees are responsible for certain tasks, such as preparing the voters and candidates lists, receiving the candidacy applications and examining them, considering the applications and objections concerning any procedures or decisions issued by the committee. And in general, the committee should be concerned with supervising both the parliamentary and municipal elections within their electoral district. Not only that, the judicial supervision over the electoral process also extends to the balloting and counting committees, as those committees are also chaired by members of the judicial or legal system in the Kingdom of Bahrain. So we can clearly see the reflection of the judicial supervision on those committees. And since the first election was held in 2002 after the reform project of His Majesty the King, and until today, all the committees we've mentioned were formed from members of the judicial authority. To surround the electoral process with more judicial guarantees, the right was given to the person concerned to appeal before the competent courts, where the person concerned is entitled to appeal against the decisions of the supervisory committees regarding the voters list and the candidates list before the Supreme Civil Court of Appeal within 3 days from the date of its issuance. And this court shall decide on such appeal within 7 days from the date of filing the case by a final judgment, which is not subject to appeal. The right to appeal was also given to every candidate against the election results held in the constituency before the Court of Cassation within 15 days from the date of announcing the general result of election. Transparency of the electoral process is the second principle of our lecture today. All the procedures carried out during the electoral process enhance the transparency required to conduct fair elections. And we will be discussing the most important of these procedures that ensure transparency and impartiality at each stage of the electoral process. Starting with the voters lists, those lists must be displayed at the premises of the supervisory committees in each electoral district for 7 days, where everyone can be able to view them. And in order to simplify the procedures, the executive managements of the elections also provided electronic methods for people to check the registration of their names in the voters lists using their ID numbers, whether by visiting the elections website or by using the screens provided at the premises of the supervisory committees. During the display period of those lists, any person whose name is not included, or if there is an error in the details concerning the registration, may request the supervisory committee to register their name or to correct the details concerning their registration. And those services were also provided electronically through the elections website. In addition to that, any voter whose name is included in the voters list may request the inclusion of a person name who unduly neglected the inclusion of his name, or to strike off the name of a person who was unduly included, or to correct the details concerning the registration. And that is in respect of the constituency in which the applicant's name is included. And as we previously mentioned, in the event that the committee rejects the request, the applicant has the right to appeal against the committee's decision before the Supreme Civil Court of Appeal within 3 days from the date of its issuance. And once the voters lists are finally amended according to the final decisions and judgments, such lists shall be deemed as evidence at the time of exercising any political rights, and each candidate shall have the right to obtain one official copy of the voters list in the constituency in which he is standing for election. Regarding the candidacy procedures for membership of the Council of Representatives and the municipal councils, the most important procedures that ensure the transparency and impartiality include that the opening and closing dates of candidature are announced before a sufficient period from the date fixed for holding the elections, as the law stipulated that this period should be at least 45 days. An initial list shall be displayed at the premises of each constituency, showing the names of the candidates in that constituency for a period of 3 days following the closure of candidature. During that display period of the candidates lists, anyone who has applied for candidacy and his name was not included in the candidates list may request the supervisory committee to include his name among the candidates, or to object to the inclusion of the name of any of the other candidates. And as we mentioned earlier, in the event that the committee rejects the request or objection, the applicant has the right to appeal against the committee's decision before the Supreme Court of Appeal within 3 days from the date of its issuance. Then the final lists of the candidates' names shall be displayed each at the premises of his constituency, and the said names should be announced in one of the local publication means. And also, in an effort to simplify the procedures, the executive management of the elections displays the candidates list, whether the initial or the final ones, through the elections website. In the voting process, a place is allocated for the candidates or their agents to observe the voting process. Booths are allocated in the balloting hall for voting in order to maintain the secrecy of the votes and to be far from the candidate's sight and influence. The use of cell phones and photographic devices in the voting booths is prohibited. Before the starting of the election, the chairman of the balloting and counting committee inspects the ballot boxes in front of the candidates or their agents by opening them and verifying their validity and that they are empty. Then it closes them with a security seal. The chairman of the committee shall open the balloting minutes, in which all the procedures and decisions taken by the committee should be recorded according to the issues received during the balloting process. The balloting papers are distributed randomly among the employees. After the end of the voting time, the chairman of the committee shall withdraw all the remaining ballot papers to count them and record them in the balloting minutes. And the slots of the ballot boxes should be sealed with security seals. The chairman of the committee shall then close the balloting minutes, which should be signed by the chairman of the committee and its members and stamped with the committee's stamp. Whereas in the counting process, which is a very important process in the elections that require certain procedures to ensure its transparency, the candidates or their agents are also allowed to be present during such process. When the voting process ends and the counting process is about to begin, the chairman of the committee should open the counting minutes in which all the procedures and decisions taken by the committee during the counting process should be recorded. Then the chairman of the committee will ask the supervising member to open the ballot boxes, empty them on the counting tables, and make sure that they are completely empty. If in the counting process, or if any of the counting members while carrying out the counting process finds a vote that seems to be invalid, that vote shall be presented to the committee to decide on its validity. After the votes of the candidates are counted and separated from one another, ballot papers for each candidate shall be bundled, where every 10 papers are stapled into one packet, and every 10 packets are tied into one bundle with an elastic band, so that each bundle will consist of 100 ballot papers, and those bundles for each candidate shall be kept in one or more envelopes of their own and placed in one of the ballot boxes. And when the counting process is completed, the result of each candidate shall be recorded in the counting minutes, along with the serial number of the security seal that will be used to close each ballot box. Then the counting minutes shall be closed and signed by the committee's chairman and members and stamped with the committee's stamp. Then a copy of the counting minutes shall be deposited in the ballot box, and the original copy of it is kept for handing over in person to the supervisory committee concerned with each electoral district. After that, the ballot boxes should be closed using the security seals, and the chairman of the balloting and counting committee will accompany the ballot boxes in the vehicle prepared for such purpose and deliver them with the original minutes to the chairman of the supervisory committee under tight security procedures. Lastly, from the procedures part, we have the results announcement. And again, the candidates or their agents have the right to attend the supervisory committee premises to follow up on the process of announcing the results. The supervisory committee will receive the ballot boxes, ballot papers, and the original minutes from the balloting and counting committees, both the subcommittees and the general committees, whereas for the committees abroad for election of the Council of Representatives membership, the supervisory committees receives their balloting and counting minutes from the supervisory or the Supreme Committee, sorry. So they will receive their balloting and counting minutes from the Supreme Committee. Then the Supervisory Committee calculates the total number of votes obtained by each candidate, and the Supervisory Committee should write minutes for each constituency within its jurisdiction, in which they record the total number of votes voters registered in the constituency as in the voters lists, the total number of voters who attended and cast their votes, the total number of valid and invalid votes, and the number of votes each candidate obtained in that constituency. These minutes shall also be signed by the committee's chairman and members and stamped with the committee's stamp. For the parliamentary elections, the chairman of the balloting and counting committee shall inform each candidate of the number of votes obtained in the constituency, provided that the candidates should be also informed that such result is not final and that the final result will be announced by the supervisory committee after calculating the total number of votes obtained in the subcommittees, general committees, and the committees abroad. Then the chairman of the supervisory committee in each electoral district shall announce the election results for the Council of Representatives members in all the constituencies under his jurisdiction, along with the number of votes obtained by each candidate, and a copy of the results along with all the minutes and electoral papers should be sent to the Supreme Committee, which will make the final announcement of the general result of the election of the Council of Representatives members and inform the winners of the membership. Whereas the same process is carried out for the municipal elections, but the difference here is that the general result of the election is announced by the chairman of the supervisory committee in each electoral district and not the Supreme Committee. And that the copy of the result will be sent to the Minister of Justice and another to the municipality directorate, where such directorate shall send to each of the winning members a certificate of membership in the municipal council. In a desire of maximizing democratic gains and enhancing the integrity of the electoral process by surrounding it with the highest level of transparency, the Supreme Committee, as a result of its belief of the integrity and transparency of the electoral process, decided to allow the civil society institutions that are legally licensed in the Kingdom of Bahrain to monitor the electoral process since the elections held in 2002. Therefore, any civil society institution that desires to monitor the electoral process is welcome to submit its applications in writing to the Supreme Committee, attached to it the names of persons that will be carrying out the monitoring on its behalf. Such monitoring shall be within the determined scope, which includes monitoring the electoral process at all its stages, monitoring the conduct of candidates, political societies, and other civil institutions in regard to abiding the laws related to the electoral process, monitoring the conduct of voters, citizens, and individuals with respect to abiding the laws related to the elections, monitor and control the use of places of worship or harness religious discourse to promote candidates or vilify others, or any other violations considered punishable according to the relevant laws. There are also a set of conditions that should be met by the person carrying out the monitoring process, which includes being a Bahraini national with good reputation and enjoying full civil and political rights, not to be a member of any of the political societies, not to be a candidate nor a candidate's agent, legal agent, or recommender, and to monitor under the name of the civil society institution that he follows. And we note here that this doesn't mean the requirement to have a membership in such institution. To ensure that the monitoring process is carried out with integrity and impartiality, there are certain rules and ethics that the person carrying out the monitoring process should abide. These rules and ethics includes having the knowledge of the legislations related to the electoral process in order to perform the monitoring work objectively and with awareness, respecting the sovereignty of law, and having full compliance to the legislations issued in respect of the elections. To be fully impartial in performing his work and not to express any differentiation or bias to any of the authorities, political societies, candidates, or any other controversial subject related to the electoral process. not to expose or wear anything that demonstrates any political affiliation, whether a slogan, writing, colors, or any labels related to such matter. To refrain from carrying out any electoral campaign or displaying any symbol related to any of the candidates. To carry out his work without any personal intervention that would obstruct the electoral process, influence the balloting or counting processes, or carry out any action that might prevent or hinder the members of the balloting and counting committees from exercising their functions. Not to give any instructions or statements carrying cancellation or curbing to the decisions of the competent authorities of the elections. To carry an identity document at all times, as well as the card issued to him as a monitor, and to identify himself to the concerned authorities if requested. Not to interfere to provide advice, consultation, or guidance to the voters, or influence their freedom of choice on the election day, or even ask them about their choice before or after the ballots. To disclose the constituency in which he has the right to vote in, and whether any of his relatives is a candidate or has a direct concern in the electoral process. Since the elections in 2002, the Kingdom of Bahrain has followed many procedures and measures to prevent any obstacles or suspicions that might affect the integrity and transparency of the electoral process. And under this title, which is the last part of our lecture today, we will address some of the additional measures that has been taken to ensure the integrity and transparency of the electoral process. Starting with the ballot papers, they are designed according to precise security specifications, where they are numbered just like banknotes to prevent and detect forgery. And each paper has a colored bar that changes when touching or rubbing, and then returns to its neutral state. This makes it difficult for forgery or imitation and facilitates the detection of papers other than the ballot papers. The ballot papers are also printed in strict security measures, in addition to the fact that the number of printed papers equals the number of registered voters in each constituency, added to it an extra known number. Another thing is that the passport of everyone who participates in the electoral process is stamped to ensure that the participation is not repeated. And the stamp for the first election round is different from that of the second round. And for voting abroad, there is a special stamp as well. The system used will only accept the name once, as the ID card is passed in the scanning machines. It will be recorded that the voter has exercised his right to vote, so he will not be able to participate again, since each voter has the right to cast his vote only once. At each ballot box, there is an employee to monitor the voter's insertion of the ballot papers into the ballot box to ensure that no other papers are placed inside the box. Additional measures include using transparent ballot boxes and voting booths that conform to the international standards, where everyone is able to see through the boxes throughout the whole electoral process. The employees working in the electoral center are selected on the basis that they are not residents of the same constituency of the balloting and counting committee. Coordination is done with local newspapers and other local and international media means to prepare entry cards to the balloting and counting centers for journalists and photographers who are allowed to be present throughout the balloting and counting periods to report all that is happening in those centers and broadcast live. Cameras are installed in some of the balloting and counting centers so that the voting process is lively transmitted. Security forces and those unauthorized are prohibited from entering the balloting and counting centers, except at the request of the committee's chairman in limited cases and conditions determined by the laws and regulations. So to sum everything up, as we saw today, the elections in the Kingdom of Bahrain is surrounded by a high degree of transparency, starting from the complete independence from the executive authority and how the electoral process is fully supervised by the judicial authority at all stages. We spoke about the electoral committees, starting from the Supreme Committee all the way to the supervisory committees and the balloting and counting committees, and so how all these committees are formed from members of the judicial authority. We also saw the guarantees that are given to individuals to ensure that transparency of the electoral process, such as the right to appeal, the right of the candidates or their agents to observe the electoral process, and the right of civil society institutions to monitor at all stages. We also discussed the transparency in the procedures carried out during different stages of the electoral process, like the candidacy process, the voting process, counting process, all the way to the result announcement process. We viewed also some additional measures that the Supreme Committee and the executive management of the elections decided to implement in order to enhance the transparency of the electoral process. All that ensures that the elections in the Kingdom of Bahrain enjoy a high level of integrity, impartiality, and transparency. That was all for our presentation today. Your attendance was a great honor for me, and I hope to see you in more upcoming lectures. Thank you very much.